Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Anne Marie. I'm an Information Services Assistant. I work here at the East Shore Area Library, and we help a lot of people research and do research with the databases to find news reports and to find credible information. I'm going to start sharing my presentation, Finding Good News, using library resources to find credible news reports. So just give me one moment to get that shared. So this is Finding Good News, using library resources to find credible news reports. Just a moment, it's not. So up until recently, most of us have been getting our news from traditional news sources. And those traditional news sources include print, television, and radio broadcasts. In fact, up to 2005, about 95% of the population got their news from traditional news sources. There is value in getting your news from traditional news sources. Those news reports from mainstream news sources tend to be produced by professional journalists. And those professional journalists abide by a code of ethics. They value truthfulness and credibility. So news reports coming from traditional news sources tend to be more authoritative than those from non-traditional news sources. They're reliable and credible. They're accurate, at least for the most part, and they value objectivity. Libraries are a great place to find traditional news sources, as more and more of us have gotten away from subscribing to newspapers or even sitting down for the evening news in front of the TV. Here at the library, we still have traditional news sources like the Patriot News, which continues to serve Dauphin County. We have the Patriot News as print newspapers, and we normally keep about 2 weeks or so of those on hand. We also have digital copies in our news bank database, both current and past issues. And you can also find the Patriot News on microfilm. Here at the East Shore Area Library, where we house our microfilm collection, we have the Patriot News dating back until 1946 and up through 2016. Anything more recent is available digitally in Newsbank. We also have a small selection from 1936. Another reliable newspaper is the New York Times, and we have that in print newspapers at our locations, as well as on microfilm. And we have issues there from July of 1973 until March of 2010. Additionally, we have traditional news sources like the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and USA Today. You'll find those in print at some of our locations, but maybe not all of them. If you tend to visit a library to view one of those, you may want to check with the library location that you will be visiting to make sure they have it. Even though we rely on traditional news sources a lot of the time, it's not always convenient to go to a library and view them in print. We have become accustomed to pulling out our cell phones or logging onto our computers for a quick access to the day's news reports. Well, you can still do that with library resources and still rely on the traditional news sources that you have come to trust. Here at the Dauphin County Library System, you can find those links to the databases that contain these traditional news sources on our newspaper's webpage. And you can find that at www.dcls.org/newspapers. If you're looking at the screen right now, you'll see a screenshot of what that newspaper's page looks like when you open it up on a standard computer or laptop. Under the newspapers and magazines, we have resources like Gale News, Flipster, AP Newsroom, and the Harrisburg Patriot News through Newsbank. Let's explore those in more detail. Gale One File News is a full-text newspaper resource that provides access to U.S. regional, national, and local newspapers. It is brought to us through the Power Library. It includes thousands of images, radio and TV broadcasts, and transcripts. It's searchable, so it makes finding content on the topic that you're interested in easy and quick. AP Newsroom is a mobile-friendly platform that allows users to easily search, preview, and download the latest Associated Press content. This includes AP award-winning content that is produced by AP award-winning journalists and is vetted by its editors. Those of you who might have been familiar with our databases in the past may remember AP Images. That provided a lot of the images that was produced and showed up in newspapers and so forth, but the AP Newsroom provides so much more. I have come to rely on it for its updates and headlines, that it keeps updating every few minutes so that you're always getting the most recent information. And not only are you getting it in a quick fashion, you're also getting content that's more reliable than what you might get through a Twitter feed, for example. Another great resource is Newsbank's access to the Patriot News. Through Newsbank, you can search full-text digital copies of Patriot News articles dating back to August 1st, 1986. And then starting in about 2018, they added also an image view of those newspapers, so you can actually get the feel of what those newspaper pages look like in the actual print papers. The image view allows you to view all of the advertising and pictures and tables that the digital text content did not. Newspapers.com will provide access to all the older newspapers within Pennsylvania. If you have an Ancestry account, you may be familiar with their newspapers.com already. Ancestry provides access to newspapers.com across the nation. Here through Newsbank, the library only subscribes through those that are from Pennsylvania. So those are the only ones you're going to be able to see through the library's newspapers.com subscription. It's great because you can search articles dating back into the 1700s, maybe even back into the 1600s. Magazines and periodicals are also another great resource for finding news. Today's magazines are produced both digitally and in print, and libraries still have a pretty good selection of print newspaper or magazines that you can come in and check out. Some of the news magazines that are available in our libraries include The Nation, National Review, and Time. To find out what the library has, all you need to do is search our catalog. But as you know, more and more magazines are being only produced in digital formats. So the library has ways of databases that you can use to view those as well. To find magazines and periodicals in a digital format, start by visiting our ebooks page. That's www.dcls.org/ebooks, and explore magazine collections in Overdrive and Flipster. If you use Libby or Overdrive to read ebooks or listen to audiobooks, you're already familiar with this resource. Now you can search a wide selection of magazines. On Flipster is another searchable magazine database that carries a smaller selection of magazines, but you don't need to download any extra software or platforms in order to use it. You just need to visit dcls.org/ebooks, click on Flipster, and then if you're outside of a library, you'll have to enter your library card number and PIN number to gain access to the database. You'll be able to search current and past issues of the magazines that are in that database. For still more magazine content, you can explore Newsbank. Yes, Newsbank is what brings us the Patriot News, but it also gives us access to America's news magazines. Here they have a selection of 45 searchable titles, including The Atlantic, The Republic, Newsweek, and Smithsonian. These articles are searchable by their topic or title or author, and they provide the digital content or the text of the articles. Again, you won't be seeing the magazine pages as you would in Overdrive or Flipster, but you can still read about the contents. So those are our traditional sources of news and some non-traditional ways of viewing them. There's also a lot of non-traditional news sources that are out there, and lots of new ways for reporting and accessing the news. The digital age has led to a lot of new ways of reporting, including news aggregators, social media feeds, news apps, blogs, and podcasts, and more of us are taking advantage of those. A Pew Research, in fact, found that more than 8 in 10 Americans now get news from digital devices. One of the non-traditional news mentioned on the previous screen was a news aggregator. In case you're wondering what that is, Britannica.com defines it as an online platform or software device that collects news stories and other information as that information is published and optimizes the information in a specific manner. It pulls a bunch of different news sources, it pulls those for the same news story and gives you a chance to view that news story from all those different resources, all from one location. Here's an example of Google News, one of those news aggregators. When you read this screen, you'll see the topic or the headline. You'll see all the different coverages that it's featured and more. That can be handy when it comes to comparing the news stories from the various different news resources or news outlets. And sometimes that can be helpful to you in evaluating that news report. Seeing it from different points of view, different biases even, will allow you to judge it more effectively. So there are pros and cons to using non-traditional news sources. Some of those cons are information is often unreliable from some of the non-traditional sources. Anyone can create content. It doesn't have to be reviewed by an editor, and it doesn't have to be tested for veracity, for truthfulness. Determining authorship can often be problematic. It's difficult to determine a report's authenticity. Sometimes you don't know where it's coming from or where they got their information. Oftentimes, the information is biased. Somebody who creates a news report and shares it is often sharing information that they believe and they have a bias toward. Some pros of non-traditional news sources are that they allow for more freedom of opinion, and it's ruled by fewer regulations. They're more subjective, allowing different sides of arguments to be seen and heard. They include a large number of accessible sources, and they're easy to find multiple opinions on an issue. I want to caution anyone who disseminates news from non-traditional news sources, because that has led to a greater sharing of news reports that are, you guessed it, fake. So what is fake news exactly? Well, according to dictionary.com, fake news is defined to be false news stories, often of a sensational nature, created to be widely shared or distributed for the purpose of generating revenue, for promoting or discrediting a public figure, political movement, company, etc. It can be a parody that represents current events or other news stories for humorous effect or in an obvious satirical imitation of journalism. Sometimes it's facetious. It's put out there to gain attention. With so much fake news out there, it's important to evaluate everything that you hear and see. even that which comes from traditional news sources. So how do you do that? Well, here's a short video. I'm going to share with you. I thought it was quite good.
How do you know what's happening in your world? The amount of information just a click away may be limited.
I'm sorry. I'm going to try starting that again.
How do you know what's happening in your world? The amount of information just a click away may be limitless, but the time and energy we have to absorb and evaluate it is not. All the information in the world won't be very useful unless you know how to read the news. To your grandparents, parents, or even older siblings, this idea would have sounded strange. Only a few decades ago, news was broad-based. Your choices were limited to a couple of general interest magazines and newspapers of record, and 3 or 4 TV networks, where trusted newscasters delivered the day's news at the same reliable time every evening. But the problems with this system soon became apparent as mass media spread. While it was known that authoritarian countries controlled and censored information, a series of scandals showed that democratic governments were also misleading the public, often with media cooperation. Revelations of covert wars, secret assassinations, and political corruption undermined public faith in official narratives presented by mainstream sources. This breakdown of trust in media gatekeepers led to alternative newspapers, radio shows, and cable news competing with the major outlets and covering events from various perspectives. More recently, the internet has multiplied the amount of information and viewpoints, with social media, blogs, and online video turning every citizen into a potential reporter. But if everyone is a reporter, nobody is, and different sources may disagree not only on opinions, but on the facts themselves. So how do you get the truth, or something close? One of the best ways is to get the original news unfiltered by middlemen. Instead of articles interpreting a scientific study or a politician's speech, you can often find the actual material and judge for yourself. For current events, follow reporters on social media. During major events such as the Arab Spring or the Ukrainian protests, newscasters and bloggers have posted updates and recordings from the midst of the chaos. Though many of these later appear in articles or broadcasts, keep in mind that these polished versions often combine the voice of the person who was there with the input of editors who weren't. At the same time, the more chaotic the story, the less you should try to follow it in real time. In events like terrorist attacks and natural disasters, today's media attempts continuous coverage even when no reliable new information is available, sometimes leading to incorrect information or false accusations of innocent people. It's easy to be anxious in such events, but try checking for the latest information at several points in the day rather than every few minutes, allowing time for complete details to emerge and false reports to be refuted. While good journalism aims for objectivity, media bias is often unavoidable. When you can't get the direct story, read coverage in multiple outlets, which employ different reporters and interview different experts. Tuning into various sources and noting the differences lets you put the pieces together for a more complete picture. It's also crucial to separate fact from opinion. Words like think, likely, or probably mean that the outlet is being careful, or worse, taking a guess. And watch out for reports that rely on anonymous sources. These could be people who have little connection to the story, or have an interest in influencing coverage, their anonymity making them unaccountable for the information they provide. Finally, and most importantly, try to verify news before spreading it. While social media has enabled the truth to reach us faster, it's also allowed rumors to spread before they can be verified, and falsehoods to survive long after they've been refuted. So before you share that unbelievable or outrageous news item, do a web search to find any additional information or context you might have missed and what others are saying about it. Today, we are more free than ever from the old media gatekeepers who used to control the flow of information. But with freedom comes responsibility. The responsibility to curate our own experience and ensure that this flow does not become a flood, leaving us less informed than before we took the plunge.
If you had trouble hearing that, which I suspect you might have, just go to YouTube and search for How to Choose Your News and watch it again. It's well worth the effort. So there's also a couple of great sites to help you learn how to evaluate your news reports. One is the News Literacy Project, and you can find that at https://newslit.org. And Common Sense Education. Common Sense Education provides a lot of information geared toward students, and it's a great resource to have your children look at, or if you're an educator, to use to create lesson plans for teaching about news literacy. The News Literacy Project has content that's suitable for a broad audience, including adults, so check it out. Here are some tips for spotting some fake news. And you don't have to remember this table. We have it posted on our newspapers and magazines webpage. But here are some tips. Consider the source. Click away from the report or do a search for information to verify what you heard is correct and who is creating the content. Are they interviewing a well-respected scientist? Are they quoting a politician? Who is the source of that information? Check the author. Again, is the author even listed? Check the date. Some of the content that you'll find within current reports are reports that are dated or pictures from other news stories that not necessarily pertain to the current report. Check your biases. Consider your own beliefs. And could they be affecting your judgment of the report that you're hearing? Read beyond the headlines. Headlines are geared to create attention. They want you to buy that newspaper or to tune into that story or to click on that link. Go beyond that and read the actual article and judge it for its contents. Look for supporting sources. If that report seems too good to be true or too outrageous to believe, try to verify that by a second or a third source. Is it a joke? Is it outlandish? Is it satire? Consider that. And when all else fails, ask the experts. Check with the librarian or consult a fact-checking site. Some of those fact-checking sites include ones like Media Bias Fact Check, factcheck.org, PolitiFact, and Snopes. FactCheck and PolitiCheck does a lot of fact-checking on political topics. Snopes is more broad-reaching, as is Media Bias Fact Check. And again, you don't have to memorize these URLs, these websites. You can find links to these fact-checking sites on the library's newspapers and magazines webpage. So let's explore news media bias a little bit more closely. Even reliable news sources may have or tend toward a certain amount of bias. Allsides.com is a website that strives to provide balanced information from all sides of the political spectrum. So if you're looking about political information and you want to know how your favorite news media outlet rates in terms of others, whether they're left-reaching or right-reaching, it's a great resource to check with and see where they are. If you are checking your story and maybe your favorite retail outlet is or news media outlet is NBC, which on this chart is left-reaching, and you want to get a right-reaching counterpoint to that news story, maybe you want to check the Wall Street Journal or the American Conservative and see how those reports compare and balance your expectation of what that news is and whether it's truthful or not, and so forth. So what are some of the best places to get your news? And here I'm going to show a little bit of my bias and say, well, library databases. Library databases contain information where you can determine what the source is, who the author is, and perform some of those tests for that information. Rely on reputable news magazines and newspapers. Rely on Pulitzer Prize winning news sources. And again, follow some of these best practices. Get your news from multiple sources and news agencies. Review the report sources. Look for the author, date, mission statements, supporting evidence, affiliations. Fact check the information, especially if it seems outrageous. Understand that any news report could be biased or contain false or incorrect information. Judge it based solely on the evidence presented. Even good news reporting also often runs into cases where they have to print a retraction or further explain the news that they put out there. And don't pass on questionable news reports. So now I'd like to open it up for questions and comments.